Hi, you warmly welcome to the SMS by Dressens channel, your online fashion classroom where you get all your fashion tutorials that enables you to learn how to sew by yourself. This tutorial is on edge finishing, the little techniques that you can use to finish your raw edges like your facings, your seams, your bindings and your piping. I hope you enjoy this video. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share this video. Let's get going. So this is a neckline to do the decorative facing, and this is a scalloped hem. I'm now cutting out the desired shape for my scalloped hem. I want it a bit broad to serve more or less as a border, so it can be very visible. So this is what I ended up with. Very beautiful. And then now I'm going to be cutting out my facing on the interfacing that will be stiffened onto a fabric later. I'm introducing the desired shape needed onto the interfacing now, and then I'll trim it out to be attached onto the fabric later on. This is what we ended up with. I'm going to be cutting out my crosswaist strips now to do the binding for the back neckline. So fold the fabric diagonally and cut out your strips at least about 2 inches width. This is the back neckline. I've given it a slit at the center, and so we'll bind the edges and then tie, give it a tie. I've stiffened my facing now. I've clipped the edges. I'm preparing the edges. I'm rolling it and tucking it in beautifully. Press a center line. Always remember to give your decorative facing a center line for balancing on the main outfit. You balance the center line of the decorative facing to the center line of your fabric. Balancing is very important when you are working with such facings. That's it. So this is my decorative facing. We'll go to the machine now and then attach it center line to center line. So I'm placing the facing on the wrong side, because when I'm done I'll roll it over to the right side. So scallops are also on the wrong side. I'm going to stitch off camera. I've done that, and then I'll clip it now. Clip the round edge and then roll it over. I've done that off camera, so I'm pressing the shape out nicely for the scallops and also for the decorative facing. So this is how simple it is, not too difficult. Once I'm done, I'll give it a nice top stitching using 1/2 inch from the edge. I'll edge stitch the neckline, the outer edges, and then the border of the decorative facing, and then the scalloped end. So this is it. Off camera, I've done my top stitching. This is what you see. You can see the interval I use for the top stitching, and that's it. Time to work on my neckline now. This is binding. We'll give it a tie at the neckline. So always test the fabric for stretching ability. If you've cut it correctly, you'll get it. That's how to join it. So I'm going to join the whole strip, fold it into 2, press, and then use the raw edge part of it to pick the seam. So treat the slit first. I'm going to stretch it open and then apply the strip onto the wrong side, using 1/2 inch for the seam. So I open the strip up like this and then stitch to the very end. When I'm done, I'm going to give it a little clip at the corner there, so when I turn it over it will lie flat. A quick trim and then roll it over beautifully like this. Cover the seam within, pin up, and then stitch it in place. Very easy to do. So that's it. I've stitched it off camera. Now for the corner, I'm going to fold it into two and then give it a neat V stitch, just like that. So when I turn it, it will lie flat like this. So I've done the stitching on the wrong side. And then on the right side, this is what it looks like. We'll move on to the neckline proper now. Work on the neckline, give it an extra string for tying. So again, I worked from the wrong side, applied the string on the wrong side. I'll clip the neckline and then turn it to the right side. I also did the same to the border or the hem. So I'm clipping the neckline now, and then I'll roll over the seam, just as I did for the cuts at the back. So I'm rolling over the fabric, the fabric for binding, and then I'm rolling in the strip too, and then giving it the final stitch. So I can tie it. This style is great for children's dresses. So this is what we got. Very simple. We'll move on to our piping and then our normal facings, our shaped facings. So this is a princess line. I'll be using a contrast fabric for the piping of the seam, and then I'll use a shaped facing for the neckline. I cut the facing off camera, and so I've applied the facing. I'm clipping the seam of the facing now. So I want to top stitch, so I turn the facing I turn the seam onto the facing, and then I top stitch on it and then roll it over to the wrong side. Now I'm applying my piping. So I'm going to attach the piping using 1/2 inch for the entire length of the seam. I'm using a contrast color thread, so the stitching will be visible on the wrong side. What I'm doing right now, I'll be repeating it at the other side of the seam. I'll repeat same to the other side of the seam before I attach the pieces for the side. So you can see the contrast color. I have applied the strip on both sides. On the wrong side, you can see the white thread I use. We are going to be attaching the sides to it, and then I'll be stitching on the same white thread. This ensures that the same size of binding shows throughout the entire length of the garment, so you don't have the binding looking big at one side and then smaller at the other side. Time for pressing, and this is our princess line, which has been piped. We are working on the armhole now. I'm going to bind the armhole. So this is a bound facing instead of a shaped facing. I use a shaped facing for the neckline, but for the armhole I'm using bound facing. So I use the same crossways strip, apply it to the right side, top stitch the seam just as I did to the shaped facing, top stitch the seam onto the strip for binding, 1/4 inch from the initial seam, and then roll it over beautifully. I've done the top stitching, so I'll roll it over onto the wrong side now, pin it up, and then give it a quick stitch, or you can hand hem it into position. So that's my shaped facing, and that's my bound facing. We are moving on to seams now. French seams are great for transparent fabrics because it hides all the raw edge. So I'm going to be working on the side seam and the shoulder. It's great for straight seams, so give it 1/2 inch stitch initially and then trim it down to 1/4 inch on the right side. You always start the French seam on the right side. Now I roll it over onto the wrong side and encase the initial seam stitched into another seam. So it's a double seam, a seam within a seam. I'm going to give it the second row of stitching now. So this is what it's looking like now after stitching Off camera, I treated the opening with binding. It's also great for transparent fabrics. So we are continuing with the French seam on the sides. On the side seam again, you always start your French seam on the right side, so you give it an initial 1/2 inch stitch on the right side, trim it down to 1/4 inch, and then turn it now to the wrong side, encase the initial seam you created, and then stitch 1/2 inch to enclose the initial seam. So that's it. Great for transparent fabrics. Everything neat, no raw edge showing. French seam for the side seams, and then binding for the opening. Now we're going to be doing a plain seam. Plain as the word plain. Just put your 2 pieces together and then give it a 1 inch stitch or 2 inch stitch, and that's it. Open it up and press it. So this is what our outfit is looking like. Now we are going on to overlaid seam, which is great for denim fabrics because it's a very strong seam. Create an open seam and then downsize one part of the seam to 1/2 inch, and then use the other bigger side of the seam to cover up the one you trimmed, and then you give it a top stitching to keep it flat, and also the top stitching serves as a means of decoration. Great for the seams of jeans, trousers, and yokes. So these are our specimens we did, our facings, our bindings, our pipings, and our seams. I hope you enjoy this tutorial. See you in our next video. Thanks for watching, and God bless.